Okay, I've not done videos before, so I'll try and be brief and quick. That's my two materials. This is the world. I've got my static mesh models that I created in another program. These are the actors that get spawned when you first initiate the build. I've got instance ones which store all the instances, and I'll go through those in a second. I've got the third person that I've modified. You can ignore that. That will look a lot different eventually. It just has all the classes that are spawned when you press a button. It goes into a flip-flop. The flip-flop, obviously, if you click the button again, it checks if the actor's valid. If it is still valid, it destroys it and sets the actor to 0. This spawns, it will spawn regardless of whether or not there's a collision, and the owner is the third person blueprint, beg your pardon. Viewport, I've basically just got it so that there's another spring arm. The spring arm has a sphere on the end of it, which I showed in the previous post. The sphere has no collision at all, and it's not visible in game. So when you click a button, it spawns one of these, for instance the foundation. Again, the foundation's got 4 arrows. They're just for really sort of visual purposes and location purposes, and it's a bit chaotic, but I'll try and explain it. So this is the spawn option, which I'll go through in a second. This is the main thing that happens. When it gets created, it obviously gets the third person and ignores it, but it traces for any it traces for any instance that might exist within a radius of 2000. If it has found one, then it sets the instance blueprint to that one, because this is shared between all of the actors. This then goes into the tick, and the tick checks. This is the sphere that checks for the collision with the hitbox. That then tells this to either, if it's hit something, it picks up the world transform of the hitbox, and it sets this actor to that location. That then goes into this, which is a bit confusing, but it basically takes the location of each of the arrows and it does a trace down to check whether or not it's touched anything. That's just on a sequence. That then goes into the AND condition, and then that tells it whether or not, if it's okay to spawn, just check to see if you're under the ground by using just a box trace. If it isn't under the ground, then it sets the material to good, so that you goes green, and then you change that to spawn. Spawn is then used when you do a spawn. When you do a spawn here, so you hit the left mouse button, checks to see if the spawn actor is still valid. It then goes into a function that I've set up, and that checks whether or not it's true, which is this one here. That just basically says yes, I'm okay to spawn. If it is okay to spawn, it spawns using a common function that I've created, so they all share the same one, and then it resets the flop, so that when you obviously click this again, you'll get a new, rather than follow this, which is pointless. Once that's being created, you then, when you've casted the spawn, beg your pardon, that spawn obviously goes through, checks whether or not the spawn's okay. If the spawn is okay, checks whether or not there's an instance blueprint. If there is an instance blueprint, it goes over the top and ignores it and just takes the one that is found. If there's not one, i.e. the first one that gets created, it creates a foundation instance, sets that, and then you call spawn instances, which again is shared by all the instances, and then that comes through, takes the transform information of where you're spawning it, and creates an adds a static instance static mesh. That instance static mesh then goes into a line trace which finds the static mesh as mentioned in a post. That gets the instance transform, and I'll just save that for now when I'm going to use the sockets. This goes into this confusing thing. This basically is going to be replaced by the sockets, but at the moment it goes into this, which basically just finds all these information, so you get where I'm starting, whether or not I'm reversing the trace, whether or not I'm reversing the trace direction, which is this one. So if it's reversing it, then obviously it gets the forward vector, but if it's reversed it obviously reverses the vector, and then you just trace and you create a collision box. The collision boxes have all got their own preset collision trace responses, which then get picked up when you create a foundation by this one here. So if I set these all to visible and I set the trace to that, and I also set that one to that as well, when I play, see you've still got, there's a sphere there that goes green because it's detected there's something there. If I turn on, these should be on, but I'm not sure why. Not sure why they're not. But anyway, yeah, so it goes green if it can create it, and then you can see you've got the hitboxes for them. But if I spawn a wall, it picks up the ones around the edge of the box. Ignore the sphere. The sphere is just that trace that picks up to find out whether or not there's an instance. And then you go like that. See that trace response doesn't work because it's floating above the ground at this nearest corner, but it will work there. I'm eventually going to change it so that you have a bit more freedom when you place stuff, i.e. make the foundation slightly thicker. Again, the walls spawn. The walls create a hitbox literally just above the character's head here, in pretty much the same way as the foundations. And that is pretty much it. I'll eventually change it all to sockets because the sockets do make it easier. But I will probably have a naming convention of sockets so that the sockets pick up this socket, which has got a different name to this socket, and vice versa. Yeah, then hopefully I'm going to have it so that at the moment, if I spawn something, if I spawn a wall here and I try and build something here, it won't let me because obviously there's no foundation. But at the moment, if I build a foundation, it won't create the box. So I'm going to have it so it sets a trace off, and the trace will check the condition of every collision box and redo them. And that way, that if you destroy a wall or you destroy a ceiling, it will obviously reset the collision boxes based off that. So, and I've just got a random slope at the moment which doesn't, it just picks up the wall's location, but it doesn't work very well because there's a big gap. Yeah, so that's pretty much it.